We're live. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us as we're almost at the end of 5 months of special education or lack of special education during COVID-19. We continue to understand as much as we can, not experiencing directly, what incredibly stressful and difficult times this is for families, for students. And our sense as we're getting closer and closer to the fall, we're just having a poll to find out what type of disability your child has. But our sense is that you as parents and students are facing, as reopening gets closer, kind of almost more uncertainty about what's going to happen in the fall. You're waiting with no clear answers. And the anxiety and worry about your children, your work, your family, with everything looming. And then this, how you make a choice, weighing what are going to be somewhat imperfect options in terms of what's best for your child and your family in terms of safety. So we want to go through a couple housekeeping things. Before I do that, I just want to say I'm sorry people are going to be disappointed and you may want to bail out and go watch your favorite binge watching, but the Department of Ed had thought that they were going to release, they had this on their agenda for their meeting with special ed directors, their new compensatory services guidance today. And they announced that they are going to delay issuing that guidance. And we're going to just give you a broad overview about what we do know about it. And then when we have more of the details, we'll share them with you later. But we do have a lot of other really important information to talk about, so we hope you continue joining us, even though we will not be spending the bulk of our time on compensatory services the way we anticipated. This will be about 45 minutes. We know you all are very busy. We'll have a wrapping up point at 8:45, and we'll stay on for more questions for those who want to stay till 9. It is being recorded, and Lily is going to provide you a few more housekeeping things before we jump in.
Yeah, thank you, Julia. Welcome, everyone. I just want to say we'll be pausing throughout the presentation tonight to take your questions. So please submit any questions you have using the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. We'll also be dropping some resources into the chat box, but that will be closed to attendees. So submit any questions or comments through the Q&A button. For those of you joining us live on Facebook, hello, and please submit your questions as comments under the live stream. If you see someone else's question that you'd like us to answer, please give it a like so we know to upvote it. Thank you.
Great, thanks Lilia Malecki, who's our communications manager, and David Spicer, who is our communications intern, is here as well, helping us out. The other thing that we really want to invite you to do is, we realized in our last chat that, there's a lot of questions that everybody's figuring out the answers to as we go. And in addition to questions, in the question bar that Lily was talking about, please share your ideas, your strategies with each other about what's working or what you've tried that hasn't worked to address different issues. And Lily will also be reviewing those to share things that may be helpful for others to hear as well. We're going to try to answer as many questions as we can. If we don't get to all the questions, we apologize. You can call our helpline. You can also cut and paste your question if you still want it answered, and go to our website and you can fill out a helpline form. We'll give you information about how to do that, and we will answer you offline. So I can move my own slides. So here's what we know about compensatory services. The state special ed director today explained, although they have been working really hard on this guidance, it's complicated. They had a new draft and they shared it with different stakeholders, with parents, with lawyers, with school administrators, and they wanted to make more revisions based on that. And they also said that they realized that schools are really working very hard on all the PPE and the classes configurations and other things they need to do to reopen schools, and that it made sense to issue this guidance in the next few weeks when they'll have more of that done and be able to focus more on how to move forward with compensatory. So basically what the state has told all of us is that there will be an individualized IEP process unless the parents and the school district decide to do a smaller IEP meeting or do something informally. But there will be individualized IEP decisions made about whether a child needs compensatory services because of what happened over from March until now because of the unanticipated shutdown of schools. And they're going to ask teams to think about 3 different types of services, just so you can start thinking about this with your kids. One, they will, on a kid-by-kid, family-by-family basis, be telling families about the kind of general ed recovery support that's going to be offered to all of the students in your child's classroom and in your child's school. Because school districts are going to be having to provide some extra services for everybody who's been out of school. And so they want to make sure that those services are available to students with disabilities, and when appropriate, that those students are able to access those kind of general ed, what they're calling recovery supports. Then there will be a process to determine whether or not your child was unable to access or benefit from some of the services that were being offered, or if there were certain services that weren't even offered at all. And the IEP, and they're going to lay out a process for how to make a determination about what the impact was on your child and whether or not your child needs compensatory services. And those services, if they're necessary, will be provided in addition to what's in your child's IEP. And at the same meeting, you may well have a discussion about whether or not your child has some new needs that, because of what's happened during COVID, they may have some different learning needs resulting from anxiety or other disabilities that require some additional IEP services going forward. And maybe your child would need another evaluation. Maybe it'll be clear what kind of additional services will be needed. And then those services would be included in the IEP. So I hope that provides some general guidance about what they're doing. They are confident that the guidance will be out this month, and we will certainly share with you more of the details of when we have them. But the state has emphasized that this process, like all the other processes we're going to talk about tonight, has to really rely on the input from you, the parents, the other caregivers and family members who have been with your kids 24/7, and you have essential information about what your child has been getting from their IEP, hasn't been getting, and whether or not they've been able to access and benefit from those services. So more to come about compensatory services. It's going to be an important issue, we know, for many, many students and families. So Lily will let me know when we want to go through some questions, but we wanted to now talk about what's happened in the last few weeks for those of you who were with us last week, and review things for those of you who are new to our chat about fall reopening generally. And just to review the main points that we talked about last week, we know that with all the uncertainty that seems to be more and more apparent in different districts, that health and safety have to remain a top priority. The state has said that however your children are going to get services next year, that all the IEP services have to be provided, whether it's in school or remote, which is very different than last spring. And that your input and your communication is required as the district makes its decisions about how to implement your child's IEP in a way that's consistent with the safety requirements. And the other thing is that you as a parent, even if your district is offering in-district learning in the school, if you believe it's not safe for your child and family, you can choose to keep your child at home full-time and continue remote learning. We know there's a lot of uncertainty and unevenness, even though the state has given guidance about how districts should be planning in the time frames. We know that some districts are already making decisions. We're going to talk about that. I'm sure people are reading how there's beginning to be an uptick, still relatively small, but not going the direction we would like in COVID numbers. Unions are getting very active statewide and probably a lot of your communities about their uncomfortableness with opening schools in the fall the way the state was hoping. And I'm sure it's hard for you to know what it's going to mean, and it's going to mean something different probably in every community. So just to what the state had told every district, and you probably are all pretty familiar with this, is that each district should plan 3 different models, how they would open up their schools for in-person learning for all students, how to do what they call a hybrid, where students would get some in-person learning and some continued remote learning at home, and what they would do if the numbers increase and the governor orders a shutdown of in-person learning again and all students have to go to remote learning. And every district by the end of July had to submit their plan to the state about how they would implement those 3 plans. The state has now been reviewing all of those plans. There's over 500, because not only every school district, but every collaborative, every private school, every charter school has submitted a plan. And the state has said that they are going to give some general feedback based on the review of all the plans. And today were saying that by Monday evening, they would give any, they would call school districts if they had any specific feedback from the plans that they would review, because each district then has to submit their final plan of what they're going to do by August 14th. That date has been bumped back a little bit. The bottom line of all of this, I'm going to keep making the same point over and over. It's easy to say these words. The challenge is how to make this happen. Is that no matter which plan your district is doing, you have to be giving input, and you have to, and about how to make sure that all your child's IEP services are fully implemented. You also may have heard that there is an agreement that the first 2 weeks of school, public schools will not be conducting any instruction. They'll be using that time to plan, to be trained, and also the state's expecting that to be a time when they're reaching out to families before school starts to figure out how to appropriately implement IEPs and help kids plan for the transition. So we have talked about how these are just going to be incredibly difficult choices for you. And just to emphasize this point, I know I said it before, but we get a lot of questions about this. Parents, you can choose to continue remote learning at home. We are going to run this poll question again because we're wondering if, as it's getting closer, if your decisions are changing over time about if you had to choose today, what would you choose for the fall from what you've been told from your district. The state's really clear, health and safety have to be a priority, and that the teams have to coordinate with you. So one thing that we're wondering is through the question, is that the right word I'm using, Lily? I can't see any of this now. But people are giving their comments through the question, is that the right word?
Through the Q&A box. There's a Q&A button on your menu.
And if I can't see, there's also the polls. Will I be able to see those? I don't know.
Yeah, you will.
If you have ideas or thoughts as you as a parent are making this decision for yourself, it would be great if you want to share that in the Q&A box as well, because I think all families are struggling with these choices, and it would be really helpful if you have some insight about how you're making this decision or how you're weighing things. It's interesting. So we see about 40% of families are leaning towards in-school learning, about a third for remote, and about a quarter for hybrid.
Do we want to take a break here for questions?
Sure.
Okay. So just a reminder to everyone, please submit your questions in the Q&A box on the menu. If you're viewing this on Facebook, please submit your question as a comment and like any questions either way in either platform so that we know which ones you guys would like answered. So our first question is, I would like to understand more about how spring 2020 IEP progress reports should have captured progress towards IEP goals. In an ideal situation, how might the progress report be modified for remote learning?
That's a great question, and it'll be very relevant not just to compensatory services, but also to making sure that whatever is offered in the fall meets your child's needs. So what the state has said, and I don't know if we can drop this into the box, but if you email through our helpline or email Lily, I'll tell people how to contact, or we can share it when we send out the chat information maybe. The state has said very clearly that districts have to continue to provide progress reports. They should use whatever information they have from where the child was before March 15th when schools were closed, whatever information they have subsequent to that. But they also have said very clearly that they need to collect information from the family, from the caregivers. They've suggested that the state give families some form or some format to provide the information, because as we know, families and caregivers have been parents, educators. You've been jack of all trades, or Jane of all trades. So we've also provided an app that will, a phone app that you can use to keep track of the information. But I think you don't have to use the district's format. If they don't give you a format, our suggestion is, if you're concerned about the progress report not being accurate, is that you can in any way, in an email, in a letter, provide your observation and information about whether and to what extent your child's been able to make progress on their IEP goals and objectives, or if you've seen some regression. And the state also has given the district some resources, some models of how other districts have been helping parents track information for progress reports, and we can share that when we send out the recording and everything.
Okay. Our next question is, how would we handle circumstances in which a progress report does not align at all with our experience as the child's primary caretaker during the remote learning period? For example, our progress report from this past spring says under some goals that specific benchmarks do not apply in the remote setting. When they do, but the data wasn't captured by the team, or they do not make mention of the fact that my son was not able to participate in certain classes because he didn't have the bandwidth or supports he needed.
It's a really good question, and my suggestion would be, again, please share ideas with each other, because I'm sure families have really good ideas about how to respond to that. But our suggestion is, if you see an inconsistency from what they're reporting in the progress reports and what you've seen, I would use the language that the state has given in their guidance several times about how the parents' information and observations are critical to incorporate into the progress report, and explain what was just explained in that question, probably in more detail, right, and give examples. You can still do these kinds of things. We've suggested, if you're comfortable with this, if, you could take short videos, whatever or send work samples, or send work that your child wasn't even able to get to because they couldn't engage. Whatever you can put together that will really help all these decisions that are being made. Compensatory services, the right services going forward. Are there some new needs? Great. Should we go on and then get more questions?
Sure.
Oh, I have to move my slides, sorry. So we want to talk again about the in-person learning for students with disabilities. We know that the state has told districts they should be trying to provide in-person for as many of all their students with and without disabilities as possible. We know, at least what we're hearing and understanding now, is that probably the majority of districts are going to opt most likely for a hybrid plan, when most kids will have part of their time in school and part of their time with continued remote learning. We have heard that there are some school districts that have already decided that they're only going to be providing remote learning, which is surprising given the guidance from the state. But the important thing is that what the state has said is, regardless of the model, districts should in their plans be talking about how they're going to be doing everything they can to provide safe in-person learning for preschoolers who have disabilities and for students with what they define as complex and significant needs. And we went over this last time. I'll just go over it briefly, but we could take more questions if it's unclear. What a lot of families are asking is, how do I know whether or not my child is considered to have if I believe that it's safe and appropriate for my child to get in-person learning, how do I know if my child is considered to have complex and significant needs? So you can see here's the different ways the state has told districts they should look at it. There is a form that Lilia is going to provide in the chat or the Q&A. That's an administrative form that every one of IEP has, that basically determines whether a child is high needs based on the amount of IEP special ed services they have and the setting of those services. So that's one kind of automatic way. And again, if that, we can always help you, call our, email our helpline to how to figure that out for your own child. But you can see there's other examples. You know, the person who was just had the question about the progress report. What if your child's not been able to engage in remote learning? What if your child uses augmented alternative communication to communicate? So remote learning is very inaccessible and they need the in-person learning to gain their communication skills, or they're homeless, or they're in foster care, or physical disabilities or English learners. So if you believe that your child requires and you're comfortable with it in terms of safety in-person learning, our suggestion, and we'll get to this in more detail, is as the district's finalizing their plans, now seems like a very appropriate time to start notifying your team or your special ed director about what you believe is important for your own child. Again, we know these are really hard choices that families have to face. And I just want to share with you, this is a slide from the State Department of Ed in their talk with special ed administrators from around the state, because there is, you know, so much anxiety, understandably, about how to open up schools for safe learning. And as many of you know, districts were supposed to start providing in-person learning for high needs students with disabilities over the summer with the extended school year services. So I'm not going to read this, but I think what's important is the state conducted a survey to get feedback from districts who are beginning to provide in-person learning. And it's encouraging, right, in terms of how students were learning more quickly than staff thought they would about how to wear masks and how to be and how to transition back. You can see there, anyway, I don't need to read it, but I think this is something that just because I know it's a little time. Of course, physical distancing is challenging, but they're also taking the precautions, and students are learning to do the hand washing and cleaning in a way that is kind of what would be expected when you're working with high needs students. So it's not that any of this is easy, but again, this just gives you, and I think the state will be sharing more of their survey results. But what I think would be really helpful for us is if you had your own child start to get in-person instruction over the summer, please share in the Q&A what your experience was. Did it work? Did it not work? What do you think should happen to make it work differently? I really believe as these months go on, we have to be learning from each other because this is such unprecedented times. We just have to keep learning from people's experience as we keep inventing this wheel with each new turn. So some students, hopefully with disabilities, will be getting all or at least some in-person learning. We also know that many students with disabilities are going to be continuing remote learning at least partially if there's a combination model. Some families are going to believe that's what's safe for their child full time. So with this uncertainty, remote becomes even more important, I believe, to really make sure the school district knows from your perspective, did remote learning work? If it wasn't as effective as it needs to be, what, from your observations and experience, needs to be done differently? Because even if you know, things could change if the numbers go up the way they are in the rest of the country, and then it's possible, I don't want to say it out loud and jinx it, but I know everybody's thinking it, if we have a required school closure order again, now is the time to do the planning so that your child will be more likely to really have all their IEP services if that happens. So again, the state's also said that for students who are learning through distance learning at home, what's different, can you still hear me? Because I can see nothing now. Will you still hear me?
Yes, yeah, we can hear you and see you.
Oh my God, my whole screen went blank. I'm just gonna keep talking, but this is a very bizarre experience. In the spring, and now we're asking you a whole question about what you've observed about your child's progress with remote learning. The state has said that remote learning has to be more robust now. and that IEPs need to be fully implemented in terms of the related services, speech therapy, the ABA, even if it is remotely. They have that before last spring, districts were able to give a combination of some direct instruction and some just general work and learning that wasn't really implementing all the IEP services. But districts can no longer rely on what the state called resources and supports, just packets and assignments, but they have to give you a schedule of how they're going to implement the IEP. And for those students who might need special ed almost most of the school day, if they're learning remotely, I think the state, your child, everybody recognizes that it's hard for anybody to be in front of the screen and learning the whole time. So there will be some practice, some previews, some follow-up work, but the state has emphasized that it has to be supplemental work that's geared to the needs of the child, has the accommodations that the child needs so they can complete it independently with teacher guidance. And I would imagine a lot of you did not have a lot of experience with the independent work for your kids. So in terms of only 10% said their children were able to gain new skills, and over half said there's been some loss of skills, and 12% your children are in crisis. So I'm not surprised, but it's really upsetting to see these numbers. And again, our main emphasis now is to do, I mean, you're all doing this anyway, but our suggestion is contact the district in writing about what you think needs to be done differently so remote learning is effective for your child. You may want to talk to, if you have any outside developmental pediatrician or an outside speech therapist or an ABA provider provided through insurance, I would ask them for their suggestions of what to do. You know, does your child need some direct instruction about how to participate remotely so that they can more effectively benefit from the services that are provided remotely? Does your child need certain equipment? Do they need a different microphone? Do they need 2 cameras so that teletherapy, ABA, and speech therapy can be provided effectively? Excuse me. I think now in these coming weeks, our strong suggestion is you've got so much expertise from what you've observed, work with the other providers, and make in writing the suggestions of what you believe your child will need.
Okay. Do we want to take another break for questions?
Absolutely, but I'm also drink some water.
Okay. Our next question is, I understand details of plans are not available in most districts, especially specific to special education. Are districts able to approve vague plans and leave details until the very start of the school year and or shift them as the year progresses, therefore possibly leaving parents without details and making it a working, flexible program within the state guidelines?
Really good questions. The final plans have to be submitted by August 17th. I think everybody recognizes it should have enough detail, and the state has emphasized that clearly communicating with parents exactly about what's being offered instructionally, how health and safety concerns are going to be addressed in the school, in transportation. Families have to have that information. I think in terms of the flexibility, I think everybody recognizes that given the COVID cycle is unpredictable, that's why the state wants districts to be prepared even for 100% remote, because it's possible, we hope to God not, that might be required again. So there has to be flexibility to respond to the crisis of the pandemic. And obviously families and kids' needs are going to change as well. So I'm not sure I exactly answered that question because I can't remember it, but Lilia, was there something I missed?
See if I can find it again.
Or, re-ask so we can go on to the next question if I missed a piece of it.
Yeah, if there's anything we missed that you'd like us to address, then you can contact our helpline. That information is in the chat box or at massadvocates.org/helpline.
Did anybody share their experiences about the in-school instruction over the summer that are we should share?
I had someone says, I have an outside speech therapist who's covered by my insurance. Teletherapy has been very effective, and that is something parents can look into. And someone agreed that private telehealth has been a godsend.
And what should be very different is that if you've got speech therapy, any kind of related service, OT, ABA therapy in your IEPs, districts should be now prepared when schools reopen, remotely, hybrid, or in person, to provide those direct services to you as well. So again, that's why it's important to think about what other equipment might be needed. In your own case, that you've got what you need for teletherapy. But it's great to hear that it worked effectively for your child.
We have also, my daughter got in-person ESY. It went great. Wish it was longer. They're now telling me she won't get in person. And I had 2 children who were students in ESY. Both children enjoyed it very much. I felt that it was successful, but not overly impressive.
Well, everything should become more robust over time, right? As districts have more time to plan, as kids have more time to transition successfully, hopefully be supported to transition successfully. And part of why the state is emphasizing the parent engagement and input is what you all know is you've got the information that is critical to make the fall, however it ends up rolling out, be more effective than it was last spring. I think everybody recognizes last spring, March 15th, the school's closing caught everybody by surprise. Districts have had to start rolling out services before and learn this as they're going. But now over the summer, there's been time to do more planning. And so all services should be more robust. And what's important is that the state has said that as the district figures out how your child's IEP services are going to be delivered, regardless of the model, they have to first contact you and get information. Our suggestion is while you wait for them to reach out to you, whether it will be before schools open or during the 10 days that schools are closed, you can also send an email or in some other way provide them the information about what your experiences are and what you think is important to make it effective. There has to be regular, state said this many, many times, ongoing two-way communication in the parents' primary languages, and that the teams have to consider your information. Same thing for the progress reports. That's why that information for the progress reports will also help in your discussion about how to implement your child's IEP effectively. So any way that you want to get them the information and the data from your experiences with your child at home, it will help to make all these individual decisions about your child. The state just recently, I think it was this week, the days kind of blurred together for me, probably do for all of you. There's a link here, I'm pointing as if you can see my screen, but they recently developed some very comprehensive guidance about how to address the social and emotional needs of children and families and teachers as schools reopen. And in this link here, you'll see there's a sample family communication plan that has questions that they're suggesting districts consider for as they reach out to families. What's the range of questions they need to be asking about and as they reach out to students too, so that they really understand what the child and the family was experiencing. They ask the family what's the best way to communicate in an ongoing way, what's the most convenient. It's a very robust set of guidance around how to make this communication effective and actually two-way and in the parent's primary language.
I just wanted to clarify something quickly. Someone asked, as a practical matter, if plans are not released by August 17th, what is the recourse? Do we file suit against our district? I believe that's August 14th. Is that right?
Because it used to be August 10th, and then the commissioner just changed the date to 14th. Yes. Ignore when I say 17th, it's the 14th. The date is the 14th. I would suggest if the plans are not submitted at that point, it depends on what you know, and you could first write to the school committee, write to the superintendent, could file a complaint with PRS, with the State Department of Ed. We're going to talk about that. Our suggestion would be to first reach out to this district directly and ask, and then if there's no response, because obviously families need to have this information. You have a lot of planning and decisions to do for your child and for your family. Hopefully the districts will, I know they have over 500 plans that were submitted by the end of July, so hopefully districts will do that. But I would suggest first contacting the school and then going beyond there. And again, we can help you with our helpline. Should I go on, Lilia?
Sure. Yeah, we'll save these for the end.
The other thing that the state has said is that the district has to tell you in writing how your IEP service, how your child's IEP services are going to be provided differently. And it's really seems pretty clear. And so here's a question about how you would prefer to communicate your concerns and give your input to your child during COVID. Please give your suggestions in the Q&A box as well. So even if your child is in person full time, the IEP is most likely going to be implemented differently, because if your child was in a substantially separate class but was pulled out for speech therapy, it may well be that they can't be pulled out for speech therapy because that speech therapist can't go to see different cohorts of kids. So the speech therapy may need to be provided by a speech therapist in the building, working through teletherapy with a paraprofessional in the classroom. I mean, that's just an example. But because of the social distancing requirements, even the kids in school are probably going to have some of their IEP services provided differently. Some may not, depending on the amount of services and the type of services they have. But even for kids who are in Gen Ed, there's going to have to be creative ways developed to make sure that they still have a chance to be fully included or included as much as they are with their non-disabled peers, while they also get the special ed supports they need, which may typically be provided in different settings. So just to give an example of how even the kids in school are probably going to have their IEPs implemented differently. Regular scheduled phone calls and emails and texts seem to be clearly the most preferred things, as opposed to just having this state has said that parents should have a contact person, but it seems like the regular communication with the state, and it's a split. And so that's why reaching out to families is so important, to ask you what works with everything you're juggling at home. Is it email or text, or is it phone calls, or schedule, and to give you a schedule so you can plan when those check-ins will happen. So in terms of telling you how your child's IEP will be implemented differently, in school, in a combination of in school and remote or full-time remote, what the state is in the process of developing a form that kind of like the remote learning plan, but different, that districts can use. And like with a remote learning plan, if a different district doesn't want to use the state form, then they can provide the same required information in a different format. But it's really important to know what they are, the state has said they need to tell you. Is first, in this written notification, the district has to document how and when they got your input regarding how IEP services should be delivered. They have to specify any accommodations and modifications, and how services will be provided differently. And then for the students who are not in school full-time, which looks like will be many, many students, what we talked about, the schedule for regular ongoing communication, and describing any difference in the child's schedule. And so what the state said today is, to make these decisions, it's hard to imagine how a district can do this working with the parent without looking at the current service IEP, service delivery grid, and what's being proposed, in order to make sure that all the services are going to be provided robustly and to explain how it's going to be done differently. So the bottom line, and how to do this is the big question mark, is districts can provide IEP services differently. They have to involve you. They have to tell you in writing how, where, when, and what will be provided differently. And the reason they don't want to use the remote learning plan of last spring that a lot of educators and parents are used to is for two reasons they explained today. First, it's not supposed to be mostly remote. You know, as many kids as possible are supposed to be in school. We know that's not going to happen for all kids. And secondly, the remote learning plan didn't reflect the robust services that are now required going forward. So I think they're trying to make that really clear with this new plan. So they gave a draft form and process for how to notify parents this information that's here. Lily is going to drop that draft into the Q&A. It's long, it's about 5 pages. But if anybody's got the time and the bandwidth to look at it, it's a draft. It could look completely different when the state issues it in the next week or so. But I think it'd be great for families, for advocates to also give DESE, the Department of Ed, feedback about how that form could look, be even more effective than it is in the current draft. So we want to make sure you have the chance to provide input as well.
We've put that in the chat box for you, and for those of you joining us on Facebook, it's in the comments.
So, whoops, it's not moving. While I try to move the slide, you want to ask a question because it's stuck.
Sure, yeah, we've got a lot coming in.
And what time is it? Okay, maybe we should do one, it's not moving.
Here.
I need my.
Let me see if I can pull it up.
Well, why don't you ask a question first, and then you can help me with tech support.
Okay, our first question is, if the child has an aide full day on the IEP, how would that look in the fall if they're remote learning? And also, how can they explain not giving any aid services in the spring?
My brain can remember the last question first. So that's where services that were not provided in the spring is where that new process that we'll hear about in the next few weeks around compensatory services to make up for trying to make your child as whole as possible what they missed comes up, because I think everybody recognizes that not all the IEP services were provided, sadly, in the spring. Again, this was a very challenging time for children, number one, for families, for the teachers. It was, as we all know, very overwhelming. It's still going to be overwhelming, but we have more time to plan. And in terms of, I don't know your child and know the specifics. So I think if you, obviously, there's not going to be a paraprofessional physically next to the child at home. So that's where the communication and collaboration with the family and the school is going to be so important, so that you can share with them your ideas of how to provide that kind of support, whether it be remotely, whether your outside providers have some ideas of how to do it, and to do it as close to fully implement as possible. But it's really hard to give any advice without knowing more of the specifics about the child. But it's a great question, and it's the kind of things that all families are going to have to figure out as well as they can.
Thank you.
So it's 8:45. The last slides are talking about the things that we would suggest that you could do at this point to make sure that the district does as much individual planning for your child as they can as schools reopen in whatever format your district ends up opening up. If you can share your ideas about what you have found to be effective in the Q&A, you can share those with each other as well. I am going to keep going on with questions and finish these slides, but for those of you who have to leave right now, I want to thank you for all of the time and commitment you're making to, of course, I mean, you always do this every day and every night, and never more 24 hours in these last months for your kids, but we know these are very challenging times. So please email our helpline, contact our helpline if you have more questions. And for those who can stay on, we're going to talk more about what you can do, get more of your feedback and questions.
All right.
So,
I moved it over to my screen, so I'm sharing the slides now.
Okay. So briefly, this is kind of summarizes what we're talking about. What we would suggest you do if you have concerns is in writing, in an email, whatever way you're comfortable with, contact your school district now. If your child's experienced in the law skills, like over 40% of you said that they had, if they have new areas of need and might need some additional IEP services going forward, other concerns, they may not respond to you right away, but school's going to be reopening in some shape or form before we know it. So our suggestion is to start providing that information to your school district now, to your team leader, whoever you normally communicate with. If you believe your child needs the in-person learning and has complex and significant needs, or is a preschooler, our suggestion is similarly to provide that information in writing about the details of how they've done, what's been difficult for them with the remote learning, what struggles they've had. Oh, you have to now, can you change the slide, Lilia? Same thing that we're talking about if your child can't access remote learning, if your child didn't have the device or the internet, or the child and you didn't have the tech support you needed, those are specific things that your school district should be thinking about how to provide going forward. Or as we talked about with teletherapy, there might be a need for some additional equipment to make that be accessible for your child. The barriers it might be because of your child has autism or has some other significant disabilities that make the remote learning not work. Be specific about that, and again, to underscore how the communications have to be provided in the home language. How can families support their children remotely if the instructions and the learning is not provided in the parent's primary language? Ask questions you have about health and safety. When the parent asked about what if the plans aren't final by the 14th, not the 17th, you need to have that information. You need to make as informed a choice as you have when you make these unbelievably difficult choices. And our other suggestion, and a lot of you are doing this already and share the ideas you have, is to organize and coordinate with other parents in your district. We know the situation, we've seen the different plans and some of the districts that are being made, and they are so variable in terms of the amount of in-person learning, the amount of remote learning. I do believe that the voice of parents who have children with disabilities about what you and your community feel like is important to provide safe and effective learning for your kids. It's really important to advocate as an individual. And I also, in my experience, see that as you as families organize with your PAC or organize with others, as you work with the school officials or the school committee, those kinds of things can be extraordinarily effective as well. These special ed laws, our civil rights laws, they're talking about how to make sure your kids have an equal opportunity. And sadly, we know learning for everybody is going to be harder during these challenging times. But we know that for kids with disabilities to have an equal opportunity to these challenging times, there's going to be a huge need for ongoing communication and collaboration and creative thinking about how to provide these services. So I'm going to end there. We have more resources in the next 2 pages and about how to contact the state if you do need to file a complaint. Remember to call or email our helpline, and I will stay on for a few more questions. Or comments that people had about, what's worked or not worked. I can't hear you. Lilia, you're on mute.
Oops, Daisy.
We apologize for all these technical things.
You may have answered some of these already, but I'm gonna run through them and just let me know if you got to them already. My child has an IEP and was not able to do remote learning. I have asked for in-person. Can they deny my choice?
They can, because it depends on what it knows. We've talked about, there's so much uncertainty now, the way The state has been giving the strong guidance about in-person for students with significant and complex needs, and there's a lot of concern, as you know, from the teachers and from the unions about making sure that this is done safely. So it depends what your school district ultimately ends up being providing. And I think the big question, the reason I can't give you a straight answer is this, we've never had a pandemic before like this, right? And so if the state is saying a district should do X and a district, for whatever reasons, decides they need to do Y, I think attorneys, advocates, families, the state are all going to have to figure out what should be done in that instance to make sure that the students who are the most vulnerable have equal access to the learning that they need. That's so vital to their safety and their development in so many ways. So our suggestion would be, if that doesn't happen, then you might want to file a complaint with the state. That would be a great opportunity to contact our helpline or some other advocates to get advice about what the next steps are. I think some families are going to have to, pursue their different options to see how things get changed. And then there's things that are systemic, right, with the unions and the union negotiations that are making this all very complex right now. The one thing I know is that everybody wants schools to open and open safely, and it is just really complicated to figure out how to make sure that happens as quickly as possible.
So we have a few questions about adapting to remote learning, which people might be able to share their experiences in the Q&A. Someone's asking what happens when remote learning isn't really possible for things like OT, PT, and vocational. And then someone else has asked, for students who have a full-time one-on-one aide as part of their IEP, how can that support be provided in a virtual environment? Have you heard of?
We just talked about the one-to-one aide. For older kids who have vocational education, or they might have transition services or in the community, the state has been, again, I don't know how some services can be same effective. No learning is going to be as effective remotely as it is at school, right? For non-disabled kids and certainly for students with disabilities. There's been a lot of questions about the needs of older youth with disabilities who might have travel training in the community, or they might have a job coach in a job setting, or vocational education when there's a lot of hands-on experiences. Vocational schools are figuring out how to do remote learning as well. But there are a lot of resources being developed to try to teach some of those vocational and transition skills remotely. I don't think anybody would try to say it's going to be as effective remotely as it is in person. The state has also said that the community teaching for older youth with disabilities, who have transition services in the community, can and should happen as soon as it can be done safely. So far numbers in Massachusetts stay in this, we hope, really hope, in the lower level, then there may well be a safe way with proper PPE that students and their educators can go into the community, but it can't be done until it can be done safely.
Thank you, and I'm putting some resources into the chat. We did a chat on youth transitioning to adulthood during COVID-19 a few weeks ago, and that recording is available on our website. And I'll also put the link to the remote learning log in the chat as well for tracking regression. Our next question is, what do you do when a school district wants you to sign a settlement agreement instead of putting a service into the IEP?
That's a really good question. That is a question that exists in COVID and not with COVID. It's not I don't think any attorney or advocate would be able to give an answer without knowing more of the details about what's being offered and how you would make that personal decision. So I'm going to have to punt on that one and really encourage the person to contact our helpline to get more of the details.
Is there any, you might have answered this already, but is there any priority or consideration to students who are transitioning with multiple disabilities, missing therapies, etc.?
I would assume that a lot of those kids are going to be within that significant and complex needs definition, so they would become more of a priority. I know that in terms of compensatory services, the state has been thinking about how those students who are older and turning 22 during COVID, you know, clearly have a time urgency in terms of being able to successfully transition to adult services. So I think we'll see some guidance from the state for the individuals turning 22 while schools are going through the pandemic. But I think you would basically argue it the same way we've been arguing for all kids with the state guidance, that these are high need kids. And the state has recognized that.
Our next question is, we prefer in-school with safety as a top priority, but if we do end up with remote learning, we would need to hire a support staff to come to our home to help manage. We already have a child in a daycare and cannot afford additional cost. Both parents work and cannot support a full-time schooling during working from home. This is very stressful to manage. What are the options, if any?
It's unbelievably stressful. I think people were asking, there are many questions about if there's a need for one-to-one support. And that's why I think the state has really been saying as strongly as they can that the kids who need that kind of intensive needs like that need to be in school as much as possible. And it's a fair question. What if that doesn't happen in your district? What if COVID gets worse and it can't continue to happen? The state has said that for children who need to be home remotely, that districts should consider how to provide services if they can be done safely in the home. In the same way, there are ABA providers who are with proper social distancing and PPE through insurance going into the home. That's something that, again, we've got a ways to go till the schools figure out how to do that safely, or also to figure out if there might be someplace in the community, in a library, and someplace else where the child can work directly with a provider to get the one-to-one support that they might need. So the state's encouraging families to work creatively with the district to think about that. But as we know, the districts are figuring out with their unions how to do everything safely, including opening up the schools. But the state has emphasized the need to look at providing in-person services at home and in the community too over time.
Okay. And somewhat related, you might have addressed this, but if parents privately arrange for services like tutoring that the district cannot provide, but which is on the IEP, would the district have to reimburse?
That's a great question. I think it depends on, I hate to sound like a lawyer, but it would depend on the facts of the case. But I think that's why there's this going to be this need to look at compensatory services for children. So again, I think it might be a possibility. I think it would be very hard necessarily to succeed legally with that. But if that's something that you want to pursue, then there would be very specific steps that we would recommend you take in terms of giving the district notice ahead of time.
Okay. Our next question is, do I need to challenge the conclusions of my son's IEP progress report in order to make the case of compensatory services? Do I need to ask the school to provide documentation that shows progress on benchmarks or objectives to back up their claims of progress?
I think that when you have an IEP, we need to talk about compensatory. Those are all questions that you can raise. I think it sounds to me, other people in the Q&A may have ideas as well. It's a great idea to begin to ask for that information ahead of time. And I think most importantly, since the state has acknowledged that your information and your experience and whatever kinds of observations or data you might have are so important, probably what will be most also very helpful is that you pull that together and give to the school district and have that ready when you have that discussion. And also, it's clear that you can share information not just of what you've observed, if your child's gone to see the pediatrician, or if they do have an outside speech therapist. Other people can weigh in on how your child's been doing as well. I think it's almost 9 o'clock. So do we have time for one more question, or should we wrap up, Lily? I don't have a clock right here.
I'll throw in, we're at 9 o'clock, but I'll throw in one last question. This one had a lot of likes on it. Without testing, how can parents prove regression if the school denies the parent request?
That's a great, first of all, compensatory services can be available based on the individual circumstances if the child's regressed. And also, we'll talk about this when we see the final guidance, but if your child hasn't made adequate progress. So it's not, our understanding of the law is it's not like summer services where you get summer services only if your child would regress if they didn't get them. So that's one important point. Compensatory services can be available either because your child regressed or because they weren't able to make sufficient progress on their goals and objectives, which is why a lot of people ask about the progress reports. And then so I think the information that you can gather, we do have this app on the top thing here is even something you can start using now to kind of document on your phone in real time how your child is doing and what you're observing. You may already be doing that, but it's clear that your guidance and your experience, in our view, has to have a lot of weight. If you don't reach agreement around compensatory services, then all your regular options are available. You can go to mediation, you could go to hearing, you can, if you think there's procedural problems, you can file a complaint, and we can give you more specifics after we get the guidance, especially from the state, about how to go forward. So I do need to wrap up. I know people have stayed a really long time, especially when you thought you were going to hear more in depth about compensatory. We all did, about compensatory services, and we have at this time. Please join us in the next 2 weeks. We'll let you know the topic. We'll see whether or not we have the compensatory services guidance at that point. We also want to provide some experts who can answer some of your questions about health and safety issues. So we'll let you know the topic as soon as we've got it. And thank you all so much for your participation. Have a good week, and good luck as you navigate these totally uncharted waters.
Thank you, everyone. I put the helpline in there one last time, 617-357-8431, and that's on the screen also, if we weren't able to get to your question.